So considering that nervous system issues manifest in a lot of things that a lot of people are experiencing, stress-related conditions like anxiety and depression, pain, cancer, digestive issues, all kinds of things. Why aren't other people in the industry doing something? You know, like LUMNA was specifically created to treat the root cause issue of these things, which is nervous system health. So I'm just wondering why no one else is doing that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it goes back to some of the earlier questions we talked about, including that for most people, well, most people don't have the training to know how to do like the global training of medical training and plant medicine training and nutrient training. And it's just a highly specialized area. So that a lot of people have a huge amount of part of the education of this, but not the whole broad spectrum of it. Even like I was saying earlier, just with how highly specialized doctors are these days, you know, like you would think, oh, well, a neurologist should be doing this, but a neurologist really doesn't focus on anything but the brain, spinal cord, and maybe peripheral nerves, but they're less focused on how those peripheral nerves affect the digestion, for example. You know, it's still highly specialized. And then you also have scope of practice issues for MDs in particular. Like if it's not within their scope of practice or their algorithms, they're really not supposed to step out of that. So part of it in the industry is that it's too complicated. It's multi-system, and it's by nature, by what it is, it's holistic. And so if you don't have holistic training, but then of course there are a ton of holistic providers who don't have a great amount of biomedical training or training in research and looking into what the research is behind these ingredients. So I think there's just not a lot of crosstalk or cross-pollination. Also just too much work, too much time. I've realized that in medicine, and I'm guilty of this myself, just like any other physician, like we're burned out. We have way too much on our plates and we do the bare bones minimum and are still constantly behind. So like to try to invent something that works, they just think it's too much work, it's too much time. I'm not like, I don't have the bandwidth, you know, I'm already so overloaded. So that's a huge issue in medicine in general. Also, there's the inherent, going back to the research, there's an inherent difficulty in getting any natural product FDA approved, because if it occurs naturally in nature, you can't have FDA approval for that. You have to molecularly change it in some way, or it has to be some sort of novel method. Like, yeah, you can extract one constituent out of a plant and then change it a little bit, and then now it can be patented and made into a pharmaceutical. But if it's like a whole plant extract, that's made by nature, not by lab, therefore you can't get a patent on it. You can't. And so then to get research, FDA approved research, is really difficult and ultimately comes out of pocket. Like it's very hard to get natural medicines researched with FDA approval, especially in any sort of phase 1, 2, 3, 4 trials. So, and then there's just a lack of awareness of I hear all the time from MDs, like, oh, all of these supplements or all of these herbs, there's no research behind any of them. None of them are evidence-based. Like, and that might be true. In fact, that, like I just said, having phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 trials of something like ashwagandha there's a huge amount of human research with ashwagandha, huge amounts, but is it a phase 1, 2, 3, 4 trial? I mean, I'd have to look, but it's just very difficult to get that going with plant medicines. And again, especially because it comes down to funding, and big pharma can't fund something or isn't going to fund something that it can't make into a drug. But there is a ton of preclinical and animal and human clinical research on virtually every constituent we have in our formulation. It's just that, again, I see a division in medicine happening where you have natural providers who don't have a lot of biomedical background and don't have a lot of research background and an ability to really digest the science. And then you have very rigid, science-based, evidence-based, algorithm-focused medical specialists with a high degree of specialized training that have forgotten how to zoom out and look at the whole, and have no interest in looking at any research that is not an FDA phase 1, 2, or 3 trial within their particular discipline. So like a novel chemotherapy drug, or a novel immunotherapy drug or whatever, a novel immune modulator in terms of anti-inflammatory or something. They're just not really looking. And then they say, oh, there's no evidence, but it's like, there is evidence. You just have to be looking for it. And you have to be critical and know when the evidence is crap and when the evidence is great. And so all of these pieces mean that there are very few people. There obviously are plenty of people out there who have all of these unique skill sets, but it's a very small group when you think of at a global or even national level.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to mention about that. The first thing is that that's shocking, like we were talking about in another question, because a lot of the things that we draw from is Ayurveda, which is an ancient medicine. So the knowledge is there, in the most developed country in the world. It's just crazy that that's not being used. And we'll talk about that in another question, how we use a combination of ancient medicines as well as modern science to create this kind of like hybrid solution for people. The other thing I wanted to add is that it's also expensive to make.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not like a $5-10 solution that you could be making like 90% profit margins on, which is typically what pharmaceuticals look for. We have over 21 like clinically proven ingredients that are natural. We have expensive things like saffron. We have so many different things that are incredible and super effective, but they're not cheap, right? But like we always talk about, when we approach this, we weren't thinking like we want to make the cheapest thing or we want to figure out how to have the most margins. We wanted to create something that worked for people, was healthy for people, made people feel good, was good for them long-term, was an enjoyable, empowering experience, and was not addictive. And so that was our modus operandi, which is how we came to this. And then the last thing I want to say is that I really loved all the data that you brought to this when we were discussing the ingredients that we were choosing for the formulation. All the science-backed things, which we will talk about when we talk about the ingredients, of what specifically each ingredient is doing. And I know, you also have taught me about the entourage effect of plant medicines, which pharmaceuticals doesn't have, which we'll talk about more when we talk about the power of plant medicines. But one thing I really love for people is that, yes, there are these clinical studies that show you all of these ingredients and how they work. But literally you try it once and you know yourself. You don't even need any more information, which I think is the most incredible thing. Yeah, so let's get to the next question. You ready?
Absolutely.